There's a fascinating article in Revolver News. Revolver is just simply one of the most original investigative websites in the country. It's edited by Darren Beatty, who's been on the podcast a couple of times. In fact, Darren has sent me a bunch of questions to answer, to do a kind of a Q&A on 2000 Mules, and I need to get to do that. I told Darren I've been a little under the weather, but I will oblige. I'm also on book deadline, by the way. I'm finishing my book for Regnery, which comes out at the end of August. Now, in Revolver News, a fascinating article about a new idea for the GOP. And the idea is, how do you strike back at the kind of defamation that is routinely done by the left of conservatives? And Revolver basically says, look, we can take a little page out of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. Why? Because there was systematic vilification, really for years, of Johnny Depp. He was the bad guy. And what did he do? In the trial, he kind of turned it around. And he turned it around by really showing that she was the abuser, that she was the one defaming him, and that the aggression was coming, at least in many cases, from her side. And Depp had to do this in court and essentially overcome a slanderous and malicious and sinister media that had been cultivating this image of Depp. So Depp's success in doing that gives Revolver a kind of an ingenious idea. And that is, how can we use defamation law to go after the left? Well, what is the most incendiary accusation that is made by the left of conservatives? Almost always false, and therefore something that we can use to go after them on. And the answer is, it's the charge of being a racist, a white nationalist, a white supremacist. Now, says Revolver, yes, you can file a defamation case now, but a lot of times courts don't take it seriously because they go, well, they're just calling you a name. But Revolver says, no, wait a minute. This accusation of being a racist, of being a white supremacist, a white nationalist, can destroy your entire life. And they give numerous examples in the article of how it happened exactly that way. Hulk Hogan. There was a sex tape involving Hulk Hogan. No big deal. A little bit of an embarrassment. He could care less about it. But then, when there were transcripts from a longer version of the tape where Hogan used the N-word, that's it for Hulk Hogan. Essentially, his career evaporated. Hulk Hogan, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, pro wrestler in history, essentially was erased from public consciousness. His career was essentially ruined. What this really shows, Revolver says, is that there's nothing worse than being called a racist. And what Revolver's getting at here is this. GOP legislatures in various conservative states, but even in swing states where Republicans do control the legislature, need to expand defamation law. And what they need to do is they need to take these phrases like white nationalist, white supremacist, and make them per se defamatory. Now, in defamation law, when you say you've been defamed, there are two types of defamation. There's sort of the defamation per se, which means that just by falsely calling you this, you've been damaged. You don't have to prove separately damages. But in other defamation cases, you do. You have to show not only that it's false, but that you suffered actual damages. And sometimes it's very hard to prove that because the damages are hard to concretize, to make very specific. But when it's defamation per se, the idea is that the wrongful accusation is so harmful. For example, these are examples of defamation per se. Let's say that somebody, for example, accuses you of being a criminal. You're not a criminal. So all you have to show is, I'm not a criminal. They accuse me of being a criminal. That's defamation per se. Why? Because that is inherently damaging to someone. You don't have to prove it damaged you. Falsely calling you a criminal is damaging. Here's something else. Claiming that some person was inherently unethical or incompetent in their professional conduct. That's obviously going to be damaging if it's done in a, let's just say, for example, by a competitor or by an employer, somebody who's essentially saying that you, who's, let's say, a plumber, or you are no good at plumbing. You don't know what you're doing. You're incompetent at your job. Well, that's going to obviously damage people being willing to hire you, claiming that you have some kind of contagious or loathsome disease. Again, if someone falsely accuses you of this, as a result, you become a kind of a social pariah. Oh, yeah, this guy, yeah. He's got Ebola. So you can't do that because that is defamation per se. Well, it's quite obvious that calling somebody a white nationalist is worse than any of these. Which would you rather? Would you rather that someone claimed you had a loathsome disease? Which would be more damaging to your life? Or if they publicly accused you in your employment context, to your friends, in your social world, of being a white nationalist? Which is more damaging? Obviously the latter. And so this is the point. What Revolver is calling for is they're calling for Republican legislatures to toughen up these defamation laws in a way that makes the false accusation. Obviously, if you're accusing someone of being a white nationalist and they are the head of a white nationalist organization, that's not defamation. Defamation is when you are falsely accusing. But if you're some professional, you're some ordinary guy, you're some Trump supporter, you're a doctor or a lawyer, and somebody says you're a white nationalist, the idea is, okay, you know what? I'm going to take you to court, just like Johnny Depp. I'm going to accuse you of defamation because this is such an incendiary allegation. It can destroy my career. It can destroy my life. And the idea is severe penalties for defamation per se. Why? Because you don't get to falsely accuse people and ruin their lives just because it gives you kicks or just because you want to make an ideological point. So the left has been making these accusations, getting away with it. They're often encouraged by social media. They're encouraged by places like Twitter. They're sometimes supported by digital moguls. And the idea is, let's hold all these people accountable. Let's do to them what Johnny Depp was able to do to Amber Heard. Let's hit them up with $10 million verdicts and then see how willing they are to make these kinds of false accusations. Well, they can still do it, but no longer with impunity.